Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people, everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I am proud to introduce you to Dr. Richard Linowes, president and founding professor of Clarewood University, who pursues a mission to build enlightened leaders. Dr. Linowes, it's a pleasure to talk to you today. I'd love to just talk a bit about your background in business. What experiences gave you the practical experience you needed to become a teacher of leaders?
Great question, because that has a lot to do with why I became a teacher. But I guess just looking at the business career itself, I started with short term with Arthur Young. Then when I graduated school, I went to what was then Arthur Andersen's consulting division, now Accenture, worked for them for several years. Then after graduate school, I came and worked for Panasonic Electronics for a short time in Japan. And when I finished graduate school, I then went to Goldman Sachs in New York and worked in the center of the international financial markets, planning their international expansion. And because of things I saw there, I realized we could do a much better job teaching than what even though I'd been through fancy schools, I knew we could do a much better job teaching. And so I basically had spent my career trying to innovate in teaching, bringing my business experience to the classroom.
It sounds as if you took from your life experience, practical experience, as well as actual financial experience. Am I interpreting that correctly, sir?
Absolutely. I saw people who graduated illustrious schools like Harvard Business School go into the business world and do really stupid things in managing people. And so I knew we could do a much better job. So I'm not just talking about finance, I'm talking about being in an organization, knowing who you are, being well informed, being able to direct yourself, a lot of things that I learned in business. And I remember thinking, why didn't I learn this in school?
You know, it's very interesting that you say that, because I always approach business as multiple pieces within a pie. And I know that, having done some reading about you and some of your own writings, ethics and integrity in business is literally one of the cornerstones of your philosophy.
I came to teaching because I wanted to fix the business world, because I met some people who were not of high integrity. And I knew that the business world works best when your handshake is golden and you shake someone's hand and they believe you. And you build a whole career, you build a whole enterprise out of that kind of trust. Sometimes it gets eroded in this country. So I came to teaching to turn out a stream of people who had someone preach to them the importance of integrity.
It's interesting that you brought up business in this country, but I know you have some experience working outside the country, over in Japan. Tell me a little bit about the Japanese business culture and how, if at all, does it differ from ours?
Oh, it differs drastically. So, in fact, I was like a computer guy doing systems theory kinds of things until my first round of graduate school, when I had a chance to go live in Japan, where I was a trainee, an intern with Panasonic Electronics, living in the company dormitory, singing the company song every morning, doing the company exercises every morning.
Wow.
And they're very organizationally savvy. Most people are very well socialized in Japan. I know whenever I come back to the United States, I'm always shocked by how rude things are here, because people are so sensitive to each other. And there's a strict hierarchy, but people are more timid. They're not as gutsy as Americans, but there is a maturity about working well with other people. And you don't come out and really disagree with people. You try to, they call it nemawashi, you try to sort of work things out. So basically, once I learned that in my early 20s, I then realized this was going to be a cornerstone of my life, comparing the American approach towards things and the Japanese approach towards things. And a lot of what I do has grown out of that kind of comparison.
How interesting is this? So I know that you've written several publications dealing with the world of small business and Japanese business. Tell me a little bit more about your writings.
Okay, well, so basically, we'll talk about my teaching innovations. So a lot of the teaching innovations came to pass and were having an impact. And so I won a Fulbright to go to New Zealand for teaching innovations. And when I was there, I saw how Americans were operating there, and I saw how Japanese were operating there. And it was so completely different. The Japanese were so much more sensitive to the history and the local people, the indigenous peoples and so on. And they'd gotten the Maori blessings before they opened a Japanese secondary school in New Zealand. And so I thought, well, gee, we should compare how Americans and Japanese adjust to other countries in the world. So basically, most of my life has been spent visiting other countries like Brazil and South Africa and India and Poland, and comparing how Japanese adjust to that culture and how Americans adjust to that culture, and see if we can get some best practices so we can all think about how to operate in a global era.
Okay, so I'm going to be a student for a minute. You're going to have to give me some of that insight. So go right ahead.
Well, I'd love to have had you in my class, because the classes at American University, teaching a global entrepreneurship course, I had people from every continent, every class. So for 30 years, I taught there with a snapshot of people from all over the world, every class. And actually what's fun is I feel it's like a live version of what I used to do as a kid. I was a stamp collector as a kid, and I'd get all these stamps and put it in there, and there are all these still pictures on the stamp. And now all of a sudden I had live bodies there representing those countries and those cultures. They might all be wearing Nike shoes and Abercrombie sweatshirts, but down deep, they still have the ethics and the values of their grandparents. And it's made the mixture of an international classroom fascinating.
Now, you do realize that I'm a graduate of American University, the School of Justice. Okay, Professor. Yes, that's why I can legitimately say to you, if I had known about your classes, I literally could have been there.
Well, that's great. We would have loved to have had you.
Yes, indeed. So I want to know a little bit more about the additional experience abroad, because not only did you spend time in Japan, but as you have stated, you actually went to other countries, European countries that you've mentioned, so that you could compare how the Japanese and American business leaders assimilate. So give me some comparisons.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Ford, General Motors, Toyota, Mercedes, all these companies want to sell, say, to the Arab Gulf, so Dubai, UAE. So I'm there meeting with people there, and I find out that Toyota makes a point of really studying the patterns of their customers there. And they notice that all the men in that part of the Arab world wear long robes. So if the air conditioning is going to work, it's not going to work if it blows at your knees. It's going to work if it blows at your ankles. Wow. So Toyota's Thailand operation made an adjustment for Oman and Saudi trucks so the air conditioning blows at their ankles. They have 80% market share.
I just think it's so smart to think outside the box in that way. So now I get to play along with your mission statement. So where did you get the inspiration behind that mission to build enlightened leaders?
Thank you very much for asking that. And I remember when I got out of graduate, I went through Princeton, I went through Michigan, I went through Harvard Business School, and then went to Goldman Sachs. And that's when I realized, okay, well, I was kind of disappointed in some of the things I saw in New York before I left, both in how we were prepared by schools, which dropped the ball in many ways, and in how people dealt with the issues they had to face there. I said, and whether or not people are bringing the right value of integrity. I mean, to give you an example, one of the things I remember holding when I was at Goldman Sachs was a $100 million bond. This was used by Électricité de France to pay for their nuclear power. So it was sitting in the vault at Goldman Sachs. You got to be a really honest, straightforward, high integrity player to be someone who can deal at that level.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that there are people who are that way. And I also realized through the Human Potential courses that if people have a sense of mission, a Stephen Covey kind of thing, begin with the end in mind. If you have a picture about what you ultimately want to do, living consistent with that is the key to success. So we talk about what be, do, have. If I only have that, then I can do this, and then I can be happy. That's typically the American consumer. But this other way of thinking is be who you are, do the things that are consistent with that, And ultimately, over your course, you'll have everything, over your life, you'll have everything you really want. And that's Covey's habit 8, the habits of living with integrity around your mission.
Wow.
What comes out of that. And so my mission to build people to encourage that good side of people that might be there, but if they're copying Paris Hilton or somebody else they think is the right way to be, they realize that may not be it. So one of the things that I love doing, I have people write essays about what are their commitments in life and who they admire and things like that, to ask those deep questions. And the thing that's so surprising to me is that over all these years now, people may have come in wanting to be some fancy high roller, and after doing this essay, they realize they want to be like their successful grandparents.
Wow.
So I teach that, and what it basically means is that people have a fuller view about what they're trying to accomplish with their lives than maybe what maybe initially attracted them to business school.
How do you remain connected with your former students, these people who you have trained to be those enlightened leaders?
Well, it's really great because if the class works well, they're given a chance to think about the core principles that might guide their life. And then maybe the final project that they do in my class is a step in that direction. Often they stay in touch with me, and Facebook is certainly, LinkedIn has made all these things possible. But whenever I traveled, I would usually travel to go to a conference and to meet with American and Japanese companies, and if my family was with me for a family vacation, and to meet former students. So every time I travel, I would try to look up former students and go visit with them and find out how things are going and find out what I should have done in class that I didn't get. But basically, I told my students that I designed for a college crowd, and now for executives, course I wish I had in college, which teaches about government and teaches about Wall Street, but also teaches being human focused in management and teaches you to go after your dreams.
So what would you say is the most important advice you give students with regard to business?
Find an itch you want to scratch and go after it.
Oh, okay.
That's like what an oyster does. Someone puts a grain of sand in the oyster, and they spend the rest of their life trying to cover it over. And all of a sudden you got a beautiful pearl. And I think that the best enterprises are that way. Enterprise is just an organization to meet needs that sustains itself and maybe lines the pockets of the founders.
Share with me, if you don't mind, what are the core values you think have led you throughout your career and led you to the point where you are now?
Unfortunately, my wife passed this year.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm trying to deal with that. But it also, I created a charity to carry on the things that she does. She was great at entertaining. She was great at youth education. So we've set up a scholarship fund for religious educational culture training in Israel for 2 kids a year. And we've set up a scholarship for the Culinary Institute of America, 2 scholarships a year, because my wife liked to view meals as festivities and celebrations.
What a beautiful legacy.
So I try to do. So I think that I remember a New Zealand farmer I once met. I gave a little seminar, and he said, "Why are all these people having troubles trying to talk about what they want to do with their life? It's so obvious to me. The purpose of life is to contribute to the lives of others and have them contribute to yours." And I guess that's how I view life: contribute to the lives of others and have them contribute to yours. And being a teacher was a great way to do that.
I think that I would have benefited so very much from being in your class. And I look at this last few minutes that we've had to spend together as a great opportunity to do just that. Dr. Linowes, thank you so much for your time today. I have learned a lot, and I think there'll be some lessons that I can actually employ in business. Thank you again, sir.